All right, this is our list of focal species. So we'll be covering a good handful of species today, but hopefully some of these, again, will look somewhat familiar to you, but we'll go into a lot of detail about all of these and how to identify them during the breeding season. I'll also be talking about sound-alikes and look-alikes for each of these species, but just note that if you fall outside of the Oaks and Prairies joint venture geography, which was this green line here, if you fall outside of this geography, you may have sound-alikes or look-alikes or some grassland bird species that I don't address. So just be aware of that. There's going to be a lot of overlap, but there might be some that I don't address for you. So with that, I am going to go ahead and turn off my video because y'all are going to be looking at the PowerPoint from here on. And we will go ahead and get started. If I can hide the meeting controls, there we go. Alrighty, so we're going to start off with an easy one, the eastern meadowlark. Most of y'all probably have seen this bird before and are used to seeing it in the field, but if not, this guy is one that is very easy to identify. So we're starting off simple. The bright yellow breast with that black V on it is iconic. You're not going to really confuse this bird with any other bird except potentially the dick sisal and of course the western meadowlark, which we'll address in a second. From the back, eastern meadowlark can look a lot like a sparrow. These colors on the back look very sparrow-like, especially at a distance. But one of the things you can look for is the beak. So if it's got its back to you, watch for when it turns its head. It'll have this really long bill. This is a bill that's common to the blackbird family, otherwise known as Icteridae. So meadowlarks, blackbirds, grackles, they're all part of this family and they all have this kind of bill, this very long kind of triangular shaped bill. So if you see a sparrow, but it's got this kind of bill, you're dealing with a meadowlark of some kind. They also tend to flash white on the outer tail feathers when they fly, like you can see in this photo on the bottom. There's a couple of species of birds that have white on the outer edges, and we'll talk about one other, but for example, if you see a bird, you catch a flash of yellow on its chest, and then you see these white outer tail feathers, you probably know you're dealing with a meadowlark. These guys are loud and proud, as I like to describe them, so their song carries a really long ways. You can hear them from like 300 meters away. And they tend to perch in places that are really visible. So they're going to be up on top of telephone wires, fences, top of a tree, the top of like a little mound sometimes in the middle of a grassland too. So loud and proud species. We'll talk about the dick sisal, which is one of its potential lookalikes in just a moment. But I want to focus a little bit more on the western meadowlark. So the western meadowlark is basically an exact lookalike for the eastern meadowlark. You can't tell them apart unless you have them in hand or you're highly experienced birder. You're going to meet people that say, oh, you just need to look at the mustache, or you just need to look at X, Y, and Z on the bird with your binoculars. And they're not necessarily wrong, but it takes a lot of experience and skill to be able to do that in the field quickly. So really, during the breeding season, the best way to tell these species apart is by the song. So with that little segue, let's talk about the song of the eastern meadowlark and western meadowlark. So eastern meadowlarks have a mnemonic for their song, Spring of the Year. I'll talk about mnemonics a few times throughout this presentation. Mnemonics are just a way for you to kind of help remember what the song sounds like. You won't necessarily always hear this exact mnemonic. Your ears might just hear something different. It might not work very well for you. That's okay. I know plenty of people that have come up with their own mnemonics over the year. So you're going to be listening for something that sounds a little bit like spring of the year in this particular song. So pretty straightforward song, easy to remember. Again, most of y'all probably already knew this song just due to spending time outside. One other sound that meadowlarks make that you might not have noticed before is this buzzy chatter. They're usually going to make this sound when they're taking off from like when they've been sitting down in the grass or like on a fence post or something. So buzzy chatter, that's also a sound to look out for. And when you hear it, usually that's a sign to look like down a little bit, look closer towards the grass or towards the ground. Western meadowlarks, on the other hand, do not have a handy mnemonic like eastern meadowlarks do. They have a very kind of flute-like or almost hollow sounding song. Very pretty, but quite different from the eastern meadowlark. So again, this is probably the best way to tell these two species apart during the breeding season. So again, it sounds a little bit like it's playing on a really big, like hollow wooden flute or something. Okay, so western meadowlark. And just for those of y'all that aren't sure if you fall within the western meadowlark range, these are their range maps from eBird. So purple is year-round, blue is winter. So we can see that during the breeding season, we only really need to worry about western meadowlarks if you are in western Oklahoma, a little bit of central Oklahoma potentially, and then the western portions of Texas and the Panhandle. Eastern meadowlarks you can get virtually anywhere within Texas and Oklahoma. So let's talk about the dickcissel. This is a species that could potentially be confused with the eastern meadowlark, but unlikely if you're really paying attention. So this is a sexually dimorphic species. The males and females look a little bit different. The males have this black triangle on their throat, along with yellow on the breast and a little bit on their face. The females are yellow on the breast and on the face, but they lack that black triangle. Additionally, from the back, kind of like the eastern meadowlark, they can look a lot like a sparrow. And these guys are much closer in size to sparrows than the meadowlark is. So this one can be a little bit tricky, especially with the females, because sometimes this yellow color can be really faded or almost virtually non-existent. One of the things you can look for is the bill again. So if we look at this bill, it's very chunky and conical. Dickcissels are actually related to cardinals and buntings and grosbeaks. So they have this really big seed cracking bill like we see in those other species. So it looks a lot different from what we might typically see in a sparrow. So that can be a helpful tip to look for as well. And these guys are also going to be perching up in places where it's pretty easy to see them usually. So they're going to be on corn stalks, the top of grasses, bushes, the top of a tree, fence lines, etc. Their song is easy because they say their name. They're going to say something that sounds a little bit like dick, 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 sissel, sissel, sissel. So let's listen to this really quickly.
Hey, Anna, do you have time for a quick question?
Yeah, I can do a quick question.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm having trouble seeing your screen. Either that or the refresh rate on my end is really slow. I didn't know if others were having problems with that as well or not.
Oh yeah, let me know in the chat if y'all can, if you're having trouble seeing my screen.
Is that a low resolution issue?
I don't know, but I've got my bird book here, so I'm just kind of following along. The last screen I had was of the it was the soundgram of the dickcissel or the meadowlark, the western meadowlark, but it looks like something off of a Cornell's webpage.
Yep. So right now I'm on the dickcissel Macaulay Library recording.
For some reason it's not
people are saying it's.
I'll follow along, so no worries.
Okay. I am recording this as well, so if anyone wants to get the recording later, please just let me know and let me double check that I'm recording. Yep, I am recording. So yes, I'll make sure that y'all are emailed this recording later. That way, if there's any issues with the audio or the visual. Hopefully that'll be solved in the recording, so y'all can at least get the pieces that you missed there. Okay. Alrighty, so we were going to listen to the Dick Sissel recording. So again, it's going to say its name.
LNS catalog number 76767.
So again, this is probably another song that you're pretty used to hearing in the grasslands. These guys are pretty ubiquitous across grasslands. They're not too picky. It seems like you'll get them a lot of times in sorghum or cornfields. Be aware that sometimes they'll just say part of their song. So sometimes they'll just say sissel sissel. Sometimes they'll just do the dick dick part. So for example, in this recording, at the very beginning, it will just say sissel sissel.
LNS catalog number 76771.
So this one just said sissel sissel right here at the beginning. I'll play that again real quick. Sissel sissel. So just be aware that, especially if you're doing like survey work, sometimes you do get a little bit of variation and they'll just do part of the song. We'll do another one that's easy to identify by sight, painted bunting, another sexually dimorphic species. Only the males have this really pretty colored pattern. I probably don't need to do too much to describe the species to you. The only thing I really want to point out on both the male here and the female, which is in the photo below, is that bill. Note again that it has that chunky conical bill like we saw in the Dick Sissel. Again, this is another member of the Cardinalidae family, which is the cardinals, the buntings, and the grosbeaks. If we look at the female, she's a little bit more tricky because we do have a few species of little green birds that occur in Texas and Oklahoma. A couple of things to notice about her is that she has a white eye ring that you can see right around her eye. And if we look at her wings, she doesn't have any wing bars. She just has a little bit of black on her wings, and she's green all over her body. If we look at one of her lookalikes, which is the lesser goldfinch female, which is the photo on the bottom right, we notice that the lesser goldfinch female does not have that eye ring, and she has white wing bars on her wings. So those are a couple of things to pay attention to when we're trying to distinguish the painted bunting female from other little green birds. One other thing I want to mention is that in the immature birds, as their feathers start to come in for the males, sometimes you get this weird like red pattern or patchiness that shows up like we see in that top right photo. So just be aware if you see a little green bird with like random red spots and stuff like that on it, you might be looking at an immature male painted bunting. Now, the painted bunting songs are really frustrating because there's a couple of species that sound a lot like them. And if you're doing surveys, painted bunting songs are probably the most common song you'll hear, aside from species like northern cardinals and maybe like Carolina wrens and chickadees. When we listen to this song, I really want you to pay attention to how light and like easy on the ears, sweet sounding. It's not harsh at all. Pay attention to those things and we'll see how that's different in one of its sound-alikes.
LNS catalog number.
One more time. So very sweet, light sounding. It's hard to hear if you're more than like 50 to 75 meters away from it. So very easy on the ears. You could listen to it all day and it could kind of disappear into the background if you're not careful. Now, one of its sound-alikes is the blue grosbeak. Blue grosbeaks are going to sound a lot more like harsh and buzzy. They're not going to be nearly as easy on the ears as the painted bunting song is. So listen to how much harsher and like sharp and short the blue grosbeak song is. let's listen to the painted bunting again. Okay, so some of y'all are going to be like, those sounded exactly alike. How are they different? So it is tricky. My biggest hint is, again, how much heavier sounding the Blue Grosbeak song is. And I'd recommend just like making a playlist of painted bunting songs and throwing in like a couple of random Blue Grosbeaks and just see if you can pick them out over time. You're going to hear so many painted bunting songs if you spend a lot of time in the field that eventually when you run across one of these sound-alikes, it's just going to sound a little bit off to you. And usually that's a good cue that, hey, you might be listening to a Blue Grosbeak or a Warbling Vireo or something else. One of the other potential sound-alikes is the house finch. Most of y'all probably know what this bird sounds like, but I'll play it for you just in case. One of the helpful things to help you pick it apart is sometimes at the end of a house finch song, they'll put this kind of jeer sound. They don't do it every time they sing, but usually at some point while they're singing, they're going to insert this sound. So listen to it at the end of the first song, and it will be missing at the end of the second song.
LNS catalog number.
So missing at the end of the second song. It was present in the first song though, so I'll play it again really quickly. So this sound right here, kind of where my cursor is, this jeer sound is something that will pop out usually in a house finch song. Habitat is also going to be different, of course. House finches are typically going to be found near people, as the name suggests. So neighborhoods, suburban and urban areas. Painted buntings, you're more likely to run across in areas that have a little bit of open grassland bordered by some trees or like a creek with some shrubs along the creek, etc. Now, last but not least is the warbling vireo. The warbling vireo is one that you're unlikely to run across in Texas, but I put it in here because if you're up in Oklahoma, you may run across it. Here's the range map. The red is the breeding season, so we can see if we're up in Oklahoma. They're not really within the Oaks and Prairies joint venture region, but it borders it, so it's possible some of y'all may have it. This species I don't have a lot of experience with, but one of the mnemonics for it is I will seize you and I will squeeze you, and then it ends on a high note. So let's listen to this. I don't really hear the I will seize you and I will squeeze you part, but some of y'all might. So we'll listen to this and then we'll leave it at that. Okay, I just wanted to point out the two peaks in this song before the end. We have two peaks, one kind of here where my cursor is now, and then one a little bit before the red line. These are supposed to be the seize you and the squeeze you, and then it ends in a high note. So I'll play it again from the beginning one more time. So again, a little bit of a tricky species, not one that I personally have a lot of experience with, but I wanted to make sure it was in here just in case any of y'all end up needing to deal with this species sometime in the future. So let's talk about another one that's tricky with its song, but pretty easy to identify visually, the Bewick's wren. So wrens in general are pretty easy to identify despite being little brown birds. Wrens typically have these really upright tails. Some species have really short tails. The Bewick's wren and its lookalike down here on the bottom, the Carolina wren, both tend to have long tails. Wrens also have these really long, thin, and decurved bills, so they always look like they're disappointed in you or they're sad, and we can definitely see that in both of these species. And they're really twitchy, so they don't like to sit still. They're going to flip back and forth on a branch a lot, use a lot of jerky movements. The Bewick's wren is going to be pretty dull colored. It's mostly brown and gray. It does have this really bold white eye line. And the most common lookalike that most of y'all will probably run into is the Carolina wren. The Carolina wren is the bird on the bottom photo. And it's going to be a lot more rusty in color. So this pretty rusty color on the back and kind of this buffy orange color on its belly and chest. There's also some differences in habitat. Beaux wrens are usually going to be in shrubby or scrubby habitats. Carolina wrens will typically be in more woodsy habitat, but try to avoid using habitat alone to identify most of these species because we do have a lot of overlap. And I actually live in a neighborhood where we have both Carolina wrens and Beaux wrens in my front yard. So habitat alone isn't necessarily the best indicator. It can just be a helpful tool sometimes to help you eliminate some species. So Beaux wren songs are really frustrating because they're extremely variable. Usually you're going to have a couple of intro notes or phrases. There's going to be a buzz in there and then a couple of finishing notes or phrases. But birds, just like people, have regional accents and regional variations. So if you learn Beaux wren songs that are what you would typically hear in Texas or Oklahoma, they might be very different from the Beaux wren songs that you hear farther west. So just be careful when you're listening to recordings for these species that you're trying to use ones that are relatively local. We're going to listen to a couple of versions of the song, and what I want you to really pay attention to is how repetitive the song is. It's basically going to copy and paste its song and say the same thing over and over again. So both versions will have similar kind of notes and phrases and a similar overall sound, but they're going to mix up how they use those notes and phrases, but every time they sing, they'll still copy and paste it. So let's listen to version 1. So if we look at the graph on the bottom, kind of right above the play button, we can see that the graph for the first song looks exactly like the graph for the second song. So it said the exact same thing both times it sang. Now if we look at another version of the song, pay attention, you're going to see the same thing. So the song's going to sound a little different, but every time it sings, it says the same exact thing.
LNS catalog number 191106.
So again, you can basically copy and paste that song every time it sings. It's saying the same thing. Now, before we get into the sound-alike that sounds frustrating like that song, I just wanted to throw in there that wrens are one of the species that scolds. So I wouldn't say focus too much on like trying to identify the specific scold. I just want you to know that wrens do this. And it sounds a lot like the scolds that you'll hear from species like chickadees, titmice, potentially vireos, etc. So again, don't focus too much on like trying to identify what's specifically a Beaux wren scold. I just want you to know that that's the sound that they make.